Combating anti-Semitism has been a top priority for both the White House and Congress. President Biden condemned the, quote, ferocious surge in anti-Semitism during a Holocaust remembrance ceremony on Tuesday.
There is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
Journalist Michael Tracy described the speech on X, saying, quote, Biden at today's Holocaust remembrance ceremony denounces the anti-Semitic student protests in the strongest terms yet. He recalls there were also anti-Semitic demonstrations and organized riots in Nazi Germany. He proclaims that his defense of Israel will be ironclad. House Speaker Mike Johnson also spoke at the ceremony, where he compared campus protests to what happened at German institutions before World War II.
Those same elite centers of learning, where Jewish faculty and students were suddenly expelled, where anti-Jewish courses were introduced, and where professors performed horrific pseudoscience experiments on Jewish people brought from nearby concentration camps. We remember what happened then, and now today, we are witnessing American universities quickly becoming hostile places for Jewish students and faculty.
Meanwhile, over on Capitol Hill, Republican Representative Don Bacon filed a resolution to censor Representative Ilhan Omar after she suggested that some Jewish students are, quote, pro-genocide. Let's take a listen.
So I actually met a lot of Jewish students that are in the encampment, and I think it is really unfortunate that people don't care about the fact that all Jewish kids should be kept safe and that we should not have to tolerate anti-Semitism or bigotry for all Jewish students, whether they are pro-genocide or anti-genocide.
House Republicans will also be looking at school district leaders from New York City, Berkeley, California, and Montgomery County, Maryland. The leaders of these three school districts will face questioning by members of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce today on their handling of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, so there were a lot of people weighing in on not just Joe Biden's Holocaust Remembrance Day remarks, but also Mike Johnson's, largely because of how inappropriate some members of the Jewish community felt it was to compare what's going on college campuses to the lead up of the Holocaust. Moreover, specifically, Mike Johnson's evocation of Jewish professors and students being rounded up and expelled from universities really is in poor taste, given that we have seen, yes, Jewish professors being arrested and beaten up and dragged off of universities because they are protesting against the war for Palestine. Remember, we talked just last week about Annalise Orlak, a professor who was the Jewish Studies chair at Dartmouth, a woman with gray hair in her 60s or 70s being thrown to the ground and dragged away by the police, not because she's Jewish, but because she has the temerity as a Jewish woman to protest what Israel is doing in her name in Gaza. So for those acts to be basically whitewashed from recent history and completely ignored on Holocaust Remembrance Day, while real violence against Jewish people is used to basically evoke a kind of a fear campaign that's meant for us to not criticize the actions that are being taken against real Jewish Americans today in this moment, was considered to be pretty perverse and got a lot of backlash.
Sure. I don't appreciate Joe Biden in his rhetoric there. He said, okay, anti-Semitism has no place on college campuses. I think that's certainly from a rhetorical
moral standpoint.
Expressing
sure.
moral views,
yeah.
Fine. When he starts saying, hate speech has no place on college campuses, okay, but again, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. We got to be careful here. You're a government official. It starts to go in that direction. I think it is obviously correct for the president to condemn anti-Semitism, but at a time where Congress just considered and passed an act to define anti-Semitism in a way that looks to me like simply just criticisms of Israel, criticisms I don't agree with, but political statements nonetheless, it would have been more reassuring to hear Biden say something not so slippery slope-esque on a criminalization of free speech.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many protesters have to say this? How many groups have to be formed? Jewish Voice for Peace, not in our name. I mean, the point of not in our name is that it's a Jewish-led group that is saying the lesson that we should be taking from the Holocaust is that we are against genocide at any time, especially when our own suffering as a people is being used to weaponized to justify the same genre of harm being done to other people. Absolutely not in our name. The takeaway for so many of the Jewish protesters on this campus is that never again isn't just never again for us as Jewish people, it's never again for any community in the world, but particularly not being done on our behalf and in our name. So I thought that was, a fascinating choice, and I think the alignment that you're seeing between someone like Mike Johnson and someone like Joe Biden is really evocative of where the red lines in America actually exist. And as we are defining groups as MAGA, insider, outsider, establishment, anti-establishment, this issue has been, I think, very clarifying as who can really claim to be against the centers of power in the United States of America. I want to ask you what you make of the move to censor Ilhan Omar for the comments that we listened to at the end of the read there.
Well, I don't approve of censoring anyone, really, in Congress for just expressing a political view. I think that's a bad idea. I've criticized it numerous other times when they've tried to do that. I side with Thomas Massie, the Republican, who has spoken out against making those censures and statements. The reason, however, though, that people like Mike Johnson and, to some extent, Biden are accusing the protesters of being anti-Semitic or engaging in hate is that they have not sufficiently, their leadership has not sufficiently separated themselves from the goals of Hamas. They won't criticize Hamas.
But that's not what she's being criticized for. Specifically, the statement that she's being censored for, or they want her to be censored for, is describing students as being pro-genocide or anti-genocide, Jewish students.
She shouldn't be censored for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating, the idea that that would trigger anyone to want to censor her, given how many times various both centrist liberal and centrist Republican figures have called these students Hamas, have called these students terrorists. John Fetterman has, I believe, multiple times referred to student protesters as terrorists. As a sitting senator who very much knows what the powers of state exist in terms of surveillance, FISA, and the lot, to start to crack down on those who are defined as such.
Well, I don't think their rights should be cracked down on, but the leaders of the student protests, many of them do tacitly endorse the actions of Hamas, Students for Justice in Palestine. No, but they're supporting the actions of a terrorist group. No, but that's why they're being described as supportive of terrorism, because they do not condemn Hamas. They say violence and worse is justified against Zionists and Israelis. Well, they say that the actions taken on October 7th, right, you say it too, oppressed people have a right to violent resistance.
That's the legal right that they have to violent resistance.
That is terrorism. They are terrorists.
Well, no, it's not terrorism.
And if you're expressing support for that, you're expressing support for a terrorist organization.
It's a legal right to resist. It's explicitly not terrorism under international law.
They defended the actions taken on October 7th as part of
Robby, I know that
I don't care what international law says about it. It is terrorism.
We know you don't care about international law, Robby.
If international law sanctions and supports terrorism, it has no moral weight and should be ignored.
What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is the actions taken by a terrorist group that the leaders of these protests support. And that's why they're being described as anti-Semitic and as terrorists. They support it, so we're calling them out for it. They shouldn't have their free speech rights violated. They should be able to organize and do whatever they want. They can put up encampments as long as humanly possible until it has to go down. I don't support censoring them, but I am perfectly happy for myself, for Joe Biden, for Mike Johnson, for John Fetterman, and anyone else to call them what they are, which is supporting terrorists. So not everyone at the protest, but the leaders of these organizations absolutely do. They say they do. They don't condemn Hamas. We know why they don't, because in their statements they support the actions Hamas has taken. And that's why no one agrees with them, and they're wildly unpopular. So.
No, I'm not done.
Go ahead.
Bring this back to what we're actually talking about. The question is whether or not there's rank hypocrisy from people on the right for saying they're going to literally censure Ilhan Omar. Remember that the only parties that have been censored in all of this are not the ones that have been sending billions of dollars of your tax money overseas to kill 34,000 people in Gaza, but the people who have been standing up against it are two only Muslim members of Congress are the ones who have been targeted repeatedly for standing up for the interests of Palestinian people. That a majority of Americans also support. Over 60% of Americans want an immediate and lasting ceasefire.
But I don't.
And I just let you go for what?
Go.
2 or 3 minutes? I was trying to count on my watch, but I didn't start tracking soon enough.
Okay, I talked too much. Sorry. Go ahead.
But the question here is whether there's a real asymmetry that again is playing out, where Ilhan Omar, an off-the-cuff statement, says, yeah, people have to decide, there's Jewish students on both sides of the equation, pro-genocide and anti-genocide. And you can say that there are people who haven't really clarified their positions, people who were raised to be Zionists, to be told that they have an identity with Israel because of their faith, and who are wrestling through and working it through, and who might bristle at the idea of being pushed into being described as pro-genocide. Although, as per my radar yesterday, which I strongly recommend people listen to, while I empathize with the kind of psychological tension and dissonance that can happen for young American Jews as they are wrestling with the kind of what they've been told and how they've been brought up and what they're seeing happening in Gaza and what's being done in their name in Gaza. The reality is, I think that her statement is perfectly accurate, and while as statements like John Fetterman, again a sitting senator with the power of the state behind him, not just saying I think someone is kind of pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro-peace or anti-peace, but literally calling them a terrorist, knowing what can be done to people who are labeled as terrorists in the United States of America, is getting absolutely no cause for censorship for saying the exact same thing, except harsher indictments of American college students. So we'll continue to see this play out. We've seen how FISA has been weaponized. We've seen how the powers of the state have been weaponized. We've seen Columbia faculty member having these direct relationships with the NYPD and with Tel Aviv. And, I expect we'll continue to see that the book is going to be thrown at these pro-peace activists while people like John Fetterman get away with saying these kinds of comments with impunity.
More Rising right after this.